journey. You may go through some hard things in life, y'all. You may go through the fire, but that fire can be refinement too. Just understand you wouldn't have been brought this far for them to leave you.
Welcome back to another episode of Black Condor Talks. I'm your host today, Adorable Earth Angel. This talk is dedicated to creating conversations about healing and transformation with spirit and our connection to the ancestors. We have a very, very special guest today, Miss Junetta Jamerson. Junetta Jamerson is a bridge between the past and the future, working to activate liberation and spark collective healing through ancestral wisdom, cultural memory, and radical imagination. Drawing from deep ancestral medicine, her work spans education, music, plant science, and community uplift. She dedicates her work to the memory of her late grandmother, Velma Carter. We are so happy to have you with us today, Miss Junetta. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And we had a conversation a couple of weeks ago. We're planning to do some beautiful work to collaborate. And you started talking about a really key point that I think a lot of people in our community are interested in understanding more of. I was talking about kind of this relationship that we as a people, as melanated people, have with spirit and with ancestors. And over the years that I've known you, your ability to embody that connection and channel and connect with that connection in a way that is very reverent, that is very healing. So with that, that leads me to my first question to you, which is, when did you first realize that you had a particular sensitivity to ancestral wisdom or guidance?
As a child, and it wasn't even my own realization, it was pointed out to me from a young age. My father would often just comment offhand how you got mother wit, or that was mother wit you just said right there, or ooh wee, that came from another place, right? So these little offhanded comments, right, as somebody older than me, he was already picking up that there were some things that this little girl wasn't generating in of herself. Sometimes we have a little child like that in the family and just like, oh, they're too grown. They are too grown. Look at him, look at her. And we laugh, it's like that baby done been here before, right? And we might have these little relatives. And I think I was one of those little relatives.
Yeah, and so that's very cute. It sounds like it was very endearing. Would you say that it was endearing at times, or would you say when you were kind of hearing these type of things, like what meaning did you make of that? Or did you feel supported when you would hear things like that or misunderstood?
No, it wasn't that deep. I just took it in stride. It wasn't like that then, where things could easily tumble you into offense and bad feelings and stuff like that. There was a lot of things we just took in stride, which afforded an ease of communication that's often missing today. So I definitely just took it in stride. However, I'll say it planted a seed of awareness in me to, even in my little girl self, start paying attention to when the thoughts and messages I was getting were perhaps coming from beyond me and were not just my own, little child mind generation, right? They were being generated from a different realm. So for me, that was the beginning of learning how to think about what I'm thinking. There's a fancy word for that. It's called meta cognition. We are thinking about how we're thinking. And that's critical when it comes to self-awareness. In fact, you cannot have self-awareness if you lack the ability to think about what you're thinking. That's an integral part of reflection, of contemplation, of discernment, no doubt. So the beginning stages of being more in control of my thoughts was also I can attribute to that ancestral connection.
That's really powerful to think about that you had that level of perception at such a young age. And also that you had adults that were aware, like they might, there might not have been broader conversations, but just even those little offhand comments and those moments of being seen and kind of being like, oh, that is something that is seen in this moment. Um, I reflect on my own childhood and not myself not being surrounded by adults that were aware or that had the ability to name anything about what I was experiencing within my connection to spirit. So that's really powerful and profound that was tagged in your environment, that was kind of named in some way, shape, or form. And I think that what you're speaking to is very powerful in the ability to have that recognition of how your cognition is flowing and what is your thought. And I'm curious, like, um, when in that and you kind of being able to see your thoughts, what were some discerning factors for you where you realized like, oh, these are my thoughts, and then oh, there's actually that spirit or that connection to something beyond just me. Like, what were the moments in time when you were growing up in your earlier years, your formative years, where you would have those experiences that you would connect with those kind of different energies?
As I grew up and came into this connection in a more solid way, the messages that I get that are from ancestral inspiration, they feel different. Sometimes even like even just like if I look at like what energy is being activated in my body, it's different. It's placed different than when I'm just, you know, holding court, right? And I'm just talking
Mhm,
and it's just all me, right?
mhm.
Uh, there's sometimes a cadence and a choice of language that is also not used in everyday communication. That there's a subtle shift with that. Uh, yeah, those would be the main things.
And what do you feel any sensations like in the body as well beyond just communication? Is there some sort of signal in the body where you're like, oh, I'm not alone. There's there's
Oh,
something else going on.
yeah, or like I know where this message is coming from, and this message needs to be delivered, right? There's an imperative. I'm not getting this just to suppress it, put it up and wrap it up tight. There's typically a timeliness to it as well. And sometimes, depending on what it is and how serious it is, there could even be that sense of urgency. And then I'm in a position to whether I obey, right? I be in alignment with that, or I can just, there's always the choice, you can just choose to do your own thing and just, be your own bad self and suppress it, and let's just act like I didn't get that. However, in those times when there's a clear sense of urgency, sometimes it's so thick upon me I can barely talk. I can barely get the words out. You know, that energy is that strong. In those times, should I, in my flesh, decide to suppress the message there could be a consequence for that.
Yeah.
Like they have better things to do than send messages through me. Like they're not just playing around. So if I become an unreliable conduit, there could be consequences for that.
Given that, what would you say you feel like your relationship is with this ancestral wisdom? Do you like, because what I heard a lot in what you just shared. I heard the layers of feeling that presence, feeling that message coming through. Sometimes that message coming through very strong. You having the sovereignty to declare if you want to let that message come through and if you're going to act upon that message that's coming through. So I'm hearing a bunch of layers, but also I'm also hearing the layer of, being I guess maybe the word's obedient or kind of like really, yeah, being obedient
Yeah.
to what's coming through. And I'm curious, like there's like given all these different layers, and kind of being in that channel, would you say within this gift, like, are you navigating like what feels in alignment for what's good for your vessel? Are you naming that anything that comes through, if you're not obedient to it, that then that somehow is reflecting upon something about you as a channel? Like what is your relationship given those kind of dynamics of kind of holding this gift?
It's never been a problem to hold it. And there have been times that I chose the time when I delivered such a message. I didn't just run roughshod over to somebody and, oh, excuse me, I got to tell you something, right? And this is typically somebody I know. It's never had to do with like a stranger or whatever. Like and it's typically a relative, right? Somebody that they would be concerned of, right? And I'll find a way to say it and I'll find the right time to say it because I also have to be sensitive to where they're at. I don't want this to be rejected and it just bounces back because somebody is not in the right headspace. I caught them wrong. And so they just be stiff-necked. I don't want that. I want the transmission to be smooth. What they do with it, now that's their business. But my responsibility is I want the transmission to be smooth. So I am careful when it comes to things like that. But as far as, this being a problem to carry, it's not.
Yeah, I hear that. I hear that. That's powerful. When we were, it's so interesting because we were before we hopped on this interview, and we were chatting. How you doing? How you doing? I'm doing fine. I was telling you how I'm writing a book, and I don't know if I told you this about this book, but this book, this assignment from Spirit, it came through when I was dieting in the jungle with a plant called Noyarao, the tree of light. And in this plant, the spirit was like, I want you to write this book. And I was like, okay, you want me, little old me, to write a book? And it was to your point, and also just over to your point, over the years when spirit channels a message to me, I love that what you said about it's not like you then verbatim go over and say something, or it's not verbatim. It's like what spirit is asking for in its request is through you and um your own essence, your own values, your own voice, to relay that energy and be a broker where you're meeting your identity with the channeling versus just taking the raw information and just kind of dumping it out there. And I bring up my book because that was something that I've been learning and writing, that it's this is the message, this is the book, and also it has to go through and be filtered in a way that people can connect with. And I think that's also the gift of being in this space of being able to commune with spirit and ancestors, is refining your vessel and refining your education and who you are, so that as you communicate these things, that it's landing for your community, it's landing for your family, it's landing for society, like humanity, what have you. And I think that's a really important part, is that you are a part of that process with spirit. It's not just, I mean, we see channelers that do things for they and that's, that's a different subject, I'm sure, but just folks who just open themselves and let spirit talk through them unfiltered. But what I'm hearing with you, and also what I feel a resonance with as well, is that there is a layer of you in that message. There's a layer of how you are showing up and delivering it. And I think that that's really powerful. I look at you and I look at kind of, even as we were talking in your bio about the level of leadership and responsibility that spirit has placed on you in this lifetime. So not only just to be that voice in that vessel, but then also doing so in tandem with leadership and work within, the public. I'm curious how this connection to ancestral wisdom has shaped the way you lead.
Well, that application part that you were describing, the application is wisdom. It must be applied and carried out with wisdom. If my head was filled with foolishness, I don't believe I would have been given this gift. If from a young age I didn't value and seek wisdom, I would not have been given this gift, because then you can be dangerous. You're just a loose cannon. And you're not a strong enough vessel to hold it. You do need a certain strength of personhood, of fortitude, and the ability to really respect and lean into wisdom. And what do I mean by that? I found a definition that anyone else can go and find for themselves if they want to reference it. Wisdom is the ability to apply knowledge, experience, and common sense to make a sound decision and a moral judgment. That practical application cannot be underestimated. And that application must be governed by discernment. Wisdom and discernment are bedfellows. They
Mm.
operate in tandem. You do not get one without the other. So that has been the wisdom path, has been something that I've been on from a very young age, even back during like the church years. The wisdom books were my favorite books of the Bible. Everybody else might have been Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and I'm just like, give me Proverbs. I'll take that. Right? So it's something that I've long connected with. And to me, just as all of us human beings, and particularly Black people, Black women walking this out, you really come into wisdom by being an observer and an understander of human nature. There is nothing new under the sun. Folks be the same as they always were, right? Folks in this era, folks a millennial ago. People be people, and they've been tripping the same way. How about that? We think we're brand new, which does us a favor, because what we then come to realize is we're working with patterns. We're working with pattern recognition. We're working with pattern adaptation and application, but at its core, even though those patterns might be shifting for context and time, they don't change.
That's powerful. And I mean, and what you're speaking to, I think is what I feel like a lot of people who are coming into their relationship with these gifts. And I'm going to stand on a hill and always call them a gift. We have a lot of people who, when they come to do work with Black Condor, come and sit and come to our retreats, oftentimes we will have people that have gifts to tap in and connect at these levels. And it is not by coincidence the people that are selected to have these sensitivities. And what I love the connection that you're making today, that I think you're so beautifully describing, is the relationship between these gifts of connecting the spirit and the cultivation that we must make within ourselves to be able to anchor and hold that prayer. And then within that combination and that dance and that union, that beautiful union that happens when this energy is coming in, then taking that and transmuting it in a way. And that I really feel like that's what it really means to be that conduit, to be that vessel. And what are we doing to cultivate our vessel so that as that information comes in, as you mentioned, we're not just kind of like out of control, right? With that energy, with that information. We are meant to be physical beings. We're meant to eat, we're meant to sleep. We are definitely flowing through spirit and animated by spirit. But at the end of the day, we are human beings. And human beings need to take care of our physical bodies. We need to also cultivate the mind and that wisdom that you were mentioning. So it's really a holistic journey in connecting and tapping in at these spiritual levels. And I think it's really beautiful the way you've articulated that wisdom component so clearly. Oftentimes on the other spectrum, I've been to a lot of ceremonies where people are channeling, but they're so disembodied that spirit kind of takes their body and they're just tumbling around. I've been that person, by the way. Many moons ago, I was that person where you don't know who you are. You don't feel a sense of like being in your body and clearly defining who you are. And when you don't know who you are, spirit's like, well, let me fill in the space. And it might not be what you want it to be. So I really appreciate you speaking to that component that there's a job that we have to do on this side of the things to make sure that we are cultivating that relationship in a good way. I want to circle back to the question about leadership again, because I do think that I've observed you as a really important leader. Numerous times we've invited you to support us by being that conduit within a ceremonial space, by pouring libations for the ancestors and creating reverence and kind of creating an opportunity for community to connect and drop in at that level. So stepping in with that level of leadership. And so I am curious. That's one of the ways in which I've seen that demonstrated through you. And how if there's anything more you'd like to talk about with like what that process means for you when you step into that role and you're pouring and you're connecting, you're tapping in, what does that type of moment mean to venerate the ancestors and to kind of lead in that way? And also maybe if there's other ways that the ancestors have tapped you to step into leadership and how you've been able to move and flow with that as well.
Yeah. Well, I've been groomed for leadership from a very young age. It's just something I was chosen for, right? I believe that in traditional Black American culture, the qualities that we used to look for in leaders are quite counterintuitive to who we see running around today or who we see grappling for power and position. The first thing is you don't do that. You don't be running around like, just like trying to put your chicken head in wherever you can to get that little bit of shine and recognition. True leadership is seen by others. It announces itself. Your big mouth does not have to open. It's how you carry yourself. It's how you comport yourself, your whole countenance, the way you interact with other people when, there's no spotlight around. You're not putting on a show. You have that genuine interest in people. And at times, like you don't have to be talking and mixing it up with people at all. And you're totally comfortable with that. So I've just described a whole different way of being. Like I said, we see a lot of people running around these days in a very opposite manner, and they leave a trail of broken glass exactly as you'd expect. Leadership isn't something that I've jumped up into and I've chased and stepped on other people to achieve. Now, I've had people try and do that to me with perhaps not great results for them. Because that's the kind of thing you can you can do that. You can try and, step on me to ladder yourself up, but now you got to stay there. And maybe you don't got what it takes. Aren't you smart? So it's not something that I chase or seek, but when it's recognized and invited and given opportunity to express, I am at that point in time just really going to be in deep listening. What do the people need? And I get that message. I get that message, of what they're going to be needing for here, for right now, for who's going to be in the room. I don't know who's going to be in the room, right? But I'll get that. I may not get the entirety of it, and then those bits and pieces are filled in as it's happening. But typically I already have an idea. I have a very clear sense of the core message that I'm going to deliver. And as you've seen me, I do it in a very traditional way, right? Through storytelling. You're going to learn a few things. We're going to, do a little bit of edumacation up in there through song, through humor, right? We in our culture, our traditional culture, we do something called impartation in that way. Why do we do it in that way? Because then it is received. We're speaking on a different wavelength now. That everybody, regardless of their education level or if they how much they can pay attention and how much they can, how good their memory is and recall. Mm-mm. We're gonna do it that way so everybody gets the message. So it's actually a very flat, structured way of communicating within our traditional culture that we developed long time ago. Like this is going back BAM time. This is a long time. There's nothing to do. I didn't invent none of this. I just embody it.
Yeah, and embody it you do. So beautifully. So beautifully. And I mean, wow, what I really appreciate you just naming the importance, especially in these times. I don't think it's a coincidence that a lot of leaders find their way to plant medicine or they find their way to wanting to reconnect with their healing journey. Because as they do that healing work, it opens up a more authentic voice. And there's a lot of things you're mentioning around just people, you were mentioning people who are disconnected from the truth of who they really are and vying for power in ways that are not in alignment. And ultimately, everyone is trying to get to the same place of alignment, but we're finding ways that aren't aligned to do so. I really appreciate you naming that because as we continue to do that inner work and to continue to be on that journey, hopefully we can chalk up those times in our lives where we did things that were out of alignment as a lesson that we can learn from.
It'll be
And
a lesson, all right. If if spirit really intends to use you, it'll be a lesson. You're gonna get that lesson.
I thank you for saying that because
Yeah, because you need to stop. You need to cut that out. You need to leave that dog eat dog stuff where it belongs.
the doggy dog stuff, but also I feel like there's a laundry list of things that we need to do in order to feel aligned, to be a clear channel. Be like, so it's not only just not doing the doggy dog stuff, but also being there's a lot of folks coming in and not wanting to stand in their power, and stand from a place of leadership, being in their power. There's us healing issues around worthiness. I mean, that was a little bell I tooted, that little horn I tooted for forever. So it's like we can have different. There's coming at this channel from different parts. There's coming at it from being basically what we're wanting to come into now was like, look, The message is very clear that that the dress rehearsal is over and that it's time for people to step up in a bigger and better way and stepping into leadership in different ways that we can within our community, within our work, within our family, etc. And also in doing so, recognizing that we're not doing it alone. We do have ancestral wisdom supporting and uplifting us into the versions of ourselves that we're here to be. There's so many different angles of it, but ultimately we're moving towards that trajectory. I was going to ask you a question about how when you were naming, like, I didn't invent this, but I'm continuing this prayer. Um, you've answered some of that, I believe. I don't know if there's anything else you would add, but just how kind of mainstream expectations can kind of contradict this ancestral wisdom and these ways of being. You named the whole doggy dog, which is, I feel like, a mainstream energy of, like, we all, you gotta grind and you gotta be a victor. So there's a lot of cultural references that are pulling us
Yeah.
into those places. Are there any
Yeah.
other things that you would note that feel like they're modern or mainstream ways of being that go against the ancestral way?
Yes. At the core of that dog eat dog energy, it's for me to be up, you got to be down. So what we are doing, we are taking the hierarchies that have harmed us greatly, harmed our families, our bloodline, our collective people greatly. And we're just going to start replicating them and unleashing them in this little environment here. And we'll call it leadership. No, it's not. It's not. Now, it doesn't mean that there still isn't a chain of command. That's very authentic for our people too. And we have that respect, we have that reverence, but a lot of times it doesn't mean that you're up in some ivory tower and like you're so far above that like nobody can come to say nothing to you, nobody can come and ask you. And in fact, I'll tell you, you really want to know how we really get down? That person in leadership doesn't isolate themselves up on a pedestal. Because guess what? If I'm standing here on a pedestal, there's only room for how many? One. There is wisdom in the counsel of many, meaning there is a group, like a council of elders, a council of whatever, or don't even give it a name, but people who are upright, of sound mind and character, who care about what we're trying to do here, that we can, when necessary, come together into some collective decision making. It may take a while, right? Modern leadership is we gotta make the decision right now, snap decision. And what can go wrong with that? I have a saying that I advise people and I grant permission for people to do. Sleep on it. Take some time, let it settle in, right? It might feel one way now and it might feel one way later. That's fine. You just need to just, simmer with it a little bit, just marinate in it a little bit. I often I often am suspicious about big decisions, right, that are really going to be charting, the course here, coming under fire or some form of external pressure to happen right now. I'm just like, what you in a rush for? Because that can be manufactured, right? That can be manufactured knowing that under pressure, a lot of times human beings crack. We don't make the best decision. In fact, just have a knee-jerk reaction. You might have just handed a very important victory over to your opponent in that case. So I touched on a few things there, but this is the way traditionally, in our wisdom, in our culture, that leadership played out. And it's what I'm very comfortable with. And a lot of things I just described there are antithetical to what is celebrated as leadership today.
Hmm. Thank you for naming that. This talk is about ancestral wisdom, and I feel like leadership, especially in these times, is a gift that we are given, and it's passed along in this lineage and in this way. And in the continuation of us reclaiming those good and benefic qualities that, as you mentioned, I didn't invent this. This is like this whole, we're all here at this ground level. There's something really grounding when you speak about this. There's a groundedness to it. And I feel like it it's this beautiful interplay, because what we're talking about is ancestral wisdom, which is wisdom that is with us that we can enact, but also there's a quality in which as we mentioned, kind of that channel of communing with spirit. If we were to go back into the realm of thinking about spirit and thinking about these kind of unseen forces that are billowing up us and being, the leaders that stand on the shoulders of the giants, right? To be that generation that we, knowing where we're standing on, knowing those shoulders that you were naming and the pillars of that. If we were to go back to spirit and kind of do that interplay, like what is something people misunderstand about working with this unseen guidance?
I'm going to harken back to something I brought up at the beginning of our conversation. They haven't yet sorted out what voices are theirs and what voices are spirits. So what you can end up doing, perhaps inadvertently, but you do it at any rate, is you end up conflating your own stuff with messages from spirit, with messages from ancestor. And unfortunately, if you're just the kind of personality or mentality that is using it in such a way to perhaps brand themselves spiritually, perhaps like hang out some sort of shingle, I'm a spiritual person of some sort of sort, right? But yet you haven't sorted out, you can do a lot of damage. And from what I've seen and from what I've heard, this is very common. So it it behooves me to address it. What am I talking about? I'll use myself as an example. In the summertime, I was diagnosed with burnout. And I can tell you, having been through that, I'm coming out of it now, thanks be. But at the time, I can tell you beyond a shadow of a doubt, burnout has its own voice. The thoughts that I would have while in burnout are very different than the thoughts that I have now that I'm a lot better. Similarly, I've heard people testify the thoughts I had while in addiction, the thoughts I had while in workaholism, the thoughts I had while in fill in the blank, depression. Once they come out of that, they can then think about how they've been thinking and recognize that perhaps that voice isn't what I want to jump to all the time. Super critical, they've recognized it though. Now I know, it's like, oh, I know that voice. I know that voice. I know the words. I know the feelings it elicits. I know like the whole kind of impact that it has on me. And you can begin to talk back. That's super important because that voice, and then you conflate it with, let's say, like some ancestral messages that are trying to come through, you're gonna make a mess. And it's like you're gonna be like a false representative. You know what I mean? You're gonna, if you're the kind of person that says this is from the ancestors. I just remember, in church, people would say, I have a word from the Lord for you. And 9 times out of 10, what you bet? 9 times out of 10, it was just that person and the agenda they were running and what they wanted, or it was just something unintelligible that like you couldn't do nothing with, right? So people play this little thing in various circles, but I said there's nothing new under the sun. People be the same, right? Patterns. Remember that? So that is the one thing that I really want to emphasize in this conversation. Have a strong discernment around the different voices that may be influencing you and your thoughts, and thereby your emotions, and then thereby your actions. So then, if your ancestors begin to like really try and get some messages through, chances are, side note, 9 times out of 10, the messages are going to be for you. They're not going to be for you to run down the road and tell somebody else about. They're going to be for you, right? And what you need to do in order to help and to uplift yourself, right? That being said, knowing what you're hearing and where it comes from is of utmost important, because what you don't want to do is what we used to call bearing false witness. That's the term we use for it. Bearing false witness. And either now to the messages to yourself, which 95% of them are going to be for, or perhaps for others.
I think you mentioned a lot of powerful a lot of powerful things within your share. What I really love, Miss Junetta, is you're bringing it back to the individual's ability to really come into a sense of self-mastery. I think at the core of what I'm experiencing in your message is that there is this modern understanding, there is this ancestral understanding. And within that, how does one cultivate and align with their inner voice? How does one also take care of those different states of being, the depression, the burnout, or understanding that that could be operating in this moment, that we have the different layers. The thing that also comes up too when I think of this too is, if we're in the space of anxiety or depression, or for navigating various states of being, how ancestors and spirits show up to support us. You're talking about 95% of these messages being for us. And something that we talk about in Black Condor and doing the healing work in the path is really allowing yourself, when you decide to show up and do the healing work, to put your oxygen mask on and to really focus inward on your path and your journey. Because it can be so easily to externalize and want to get away from what you have going on. So let me look over there. Let me tell you this here. And I think what you're talking about when we see people bearing false witness or naming, um, it's that there's some parts of the core that don't want to be seen. So I'm going to wiggle around and use this gift in a way where I'm just almost like spiritually we call it in the new age community, we call it spiritual bypass, where you're bypassing some other work inside so that that vessel and that conduit is flowing in a way that is an alignment with the wisdom that we were talking about that we're cultivating earlier, and being that channel to spirit. I think it's really powerful in this times and timely because people are wanting to understand more how to be in alignment with these gifts. Like these are it's not just myself, yourself. There are a lot of people who maybe even, I mean, you were lucky you were naming that this was something that, this was also something that I had when I was a young girl. And but we were born into this. I did it, I was born with it. I had to tuck it away in order to survive my childhood. Like adults could not support or handle these gifts. So, and then it came back later in my 20s. I had my spiritual awakening and I was like, whoa, that was overwhelming for me. What it sounds like for you is that you over life have been able to just kind of cultivate that energy. So it feels like for you, I feel like your journey feels more grounding and more in how you were able to kind of anchor that. For me, it was just like, okay, late 20s, oh, whoa, or mid 20s. Oh, now we have to like do all of this. So I would say that I definitely name that my journey hasn't been as graceful. And also I want to name for everyone that it's okay if our journeys aren't graceful. Like it is a journey. It is a process as you start to unearth connection to spirit, to being a channel. It could be that tomorrow you get into a certain frequency and tomorrow and all of a sudden you are activated in that way. You didn't know you had these gifts. And then so within that, and it might be hard to speak to, given the fact, Miss Junetta, that you were kind of you're an OG in relationship to connecting with ancestral wisdom and spirit. But if someone were to say, wake up tomorrow, and oh my golly, I'm starting to hear or feel or sense what you were naming, that there's something beyond just me present, that and I don't, how would one begin to, one, I believe everybody has this connection at some level. One, how would one be able to maybe cultivate this relationship, open themselves to wanting to connect with with spirit in this way, guidance from the ancestors? And then even for someone who maybe these energies are coming online for the first time, or it's like a new experience that they're wanting to learn about, like what would you say about folks who are in that particular arena in life?
Hmm. Yeah, with so much influx and chaos, like right now, as humanity, we're underneath like really big, powerful energies that are affecting us the world over, like negative energies, not good energies at all, that do trickle down to the common man. They don't just stay at the, higher geopolitical level. No, they're just trickling all down. And I also think at this time, well ancestors, those elevated ancestors, are probably more accessible now than they ever have been. You see, there's always an antidote, or what we would call a ram in the bush, right? Something being prepared as an alternative to help me out of the situation, you see. And I believe that that ram in the bush right now is the availability of our ancestral connection. So that's good news. How you begin to connect with it, be still, be still, sit down, go lay down, go to bed. These are all little cultural sayings I'm pulling out now. You laugh because you know what I'm saying, but
I love it. Go lie down. Go sit down.
just go lie down now, okay? You know, you done enough. Go lie down now, right? But there's even wisdom in that. We laughing about it, but there is, girl, come on, there is wisdom in that. So that is an antidote, right? We have also fancy terms around it, and I am a somatic experiencing practitioner. Well, what we're going to do is we're going to regulate our nervous system within the window of tolerance and, all this kind of stuff. But honey, we already knew that. You're going to go sit down. You're going to go lie down. It's time for you to go to bed. It's time for you to be still. Hush. I think the modern expression is you're doing too much.
Very full circle, bringing it back to the modern times as well. You're doing too much.
Right. But there is wisdom in that because we have to still all of the noise and these like, really there's a lot of interference just on the airways right now. So let me just build up a bit of immunity to that by being still, by being still. Now we are providing more of an opportunity for those messages, for that connection to be established. And like I said, the good news is they really want to right now. It's just like, oh no, 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 no. We got to get these people through this. We gonna come forward. We got to get, you know, our bloodline through this. That's what I would say.
Mm.
Also, continue to work on developing your own self-awareness. That bypassing part that you described, you know, If you're always looking around what everybody else is doing, how aware are you of yourself in this moment? Not much. You're not really aware. You're outwardly focusing. So we want to be really clear about what's speaking, where it's really coming from. And this is even like aside from adding like an ancestral messaging system to the mix. Okay? We just want to do that for our own health and healing. That is a huge part of reclaiming our well-being, not just being at the mercy of all these different voices that may, come spinning through, right? And states of being and like, like emotional states and stuff. And we're just at the mercy of whatever comes ripping through. Uh-uh. You work on getting that together. You work on that because conflating all of that now with ancestral messaging, that's messy. That's just messy. So work on cleaning that up before it's for your own good. It's for your own good. That's part of healing. And then, like I said, just give yourself the gift of stillness. I hear so many people like, I really got that message when I was just standing doing the dishes. I got that message in the shower. I got that message pulling weeds. Like you're not doing anything of much of importance, but you've shut out a lot of the stuff and you just kind of in your space doing a little something or not. Maybe, we just sitting like we sitting right now.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I would say.
Thank you for that. So interesting as you were sharing something that came up that clicked into place for me is I mentioned again, like I got handed a book. People get handed assignments sometimes. You get handed something. As you were talking, for some reason, it clicked into my mind too, that, on this journey, um, it's not been easy to like step up to the space of saying, I am going to give birth to this book. I'm going to make this project happen because spirit can tell me this message, but really, spirit can't write a book. Spirit doesn't have fingertips or the ability to process information into words like this. I do. And on my journey of taking the assignment, I'm having to go through my own healing process in order to be the person who is at the end of the day, the author of it. The person who started out is the one with the assignment, person who ends the assignment, they're different people. And so there's also this interesting thing around the journey in between the becoming of what the assignment or what being a channel creates within you. That's another level that a layer that I don't want to not name on this call that I think is important to name. It's like there is a process of transformation when working with spirit to come in to be the deliverer of said message. And what it takes for you to do that work, to ready yourself to be the on the other form of what it is that assignment is, that I think is really powerful. And
Mm,
I think it's kind of like it's so interesting because you know we're here to do this work. We're in this conversation for Black Condor Talks. We're in this prayer for Black Condor to create a space for Black and Brown people to do the healing work, to step into the highest version of themselves and to be the leaders and to be the light that they're here to be. And I do want to give space and grace to the fact that on your journey in becoming that it's almost like, oh, okay, that's the goal right there. And yet in the journey of becoming, there's a whole cycle of healing happening simultaneously as you walk on the path in your becoming. And sometimes you're going to walk this way and you're going to have to up. I took 2 steps back, and it's not a very I just want to name and make it clear too, from my perspective, it isn't a linear path sometimes when it comes to any of this. Any of what I would name is connecting the spirit in these ways because we're human. So there's stepping forward and there's stepping back and there's being uncertain. And you need spirit to say it one more time. You need spirit to say it 10 more times because sometimes we're dense. And we need to hear the message about okay,
Knucklehead.
show it to right. Yep. Show it to me in another way. Okay, show it to me on a dove. Okay, have a dove land right here if you mean this. I'll just to say, like, as you're naming this, I'm also just wanting to embed this message with that grace that it is a process and it is always a state of becoming. And one of my favorite spiritual teachers, Abraham Hicks, says that you can never get it wrong because you'll never get it done, that we're always doing it. And so it's okay if there's a failing forward or there's this it's okay to be new to this, to connecting with spirit. It doesn't, sometimes I think also as humans, and I don't know if you feel that you've seen this, Miss Junetta, you probably could attest to this too, when spaces we can get into our ego and we can feel very uncomfortable if we don't know what we're doing. If something's new to us, we're like, well, I don't know what this is, so I'm really uncomfortable. And that unfortunately is a part of the process, is that you might be uncomfortable as you go on your journey towards connecting with spirit, because it could be that you're awakening new parts of you that you've never connected with before. And there should be some grace in knowing that that is a part of the journey, that we're not going to always be like we didn't just come out of our mother's womb and start walking. That there was that there's layers to this, right? And you don't have to go from, you know, newly trying to form a relationship with spirit and then all of a sudden just now taking it and just doing something, big. It can just be in the moments of just waking up. Yeah, I mean, I see you for Miss Janetta, you're like you're giving me some hand signals. What would you say to what I'm saying right
I'm
now?
like, oh no, 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 no. That's the last thing you want to do is just like, like brand new baby still dripping wet. And now I'm gonna like put myself out there to do something big. I don't think so. I don't think so. When you were describing your assignment with the book and the process that you're going through and everything, what I wanted to tell you is assignment is refinement.
Mm,
So there's going to be a whole process of refinement and growth that you experience through this book endeavor. And that's exactly the way it's supposed to be. These things that we've been given to do, whether it's like a directive or sometimes it's just a part of our training. When we were in Peru, you were sharing with me the training that grandmother Manuela had undergone in her earlier years and also over the course of years, which we would describe as grueling. We would describe it as I don't know, let's just okay, grueling is fine. We know what that means. But it was a lot, right? It was a lot. I'm looking at that, I'm just like, Lord of mercy, I couldn't do that. Ooh, I couldn't do that. But what did you explain it was done that way for? So she developed the spiritual muscle, the spiritual fortitude. When a group comes together, she knows how to hold all those energies and work with all those energies and keep everybody good and keep everybody safe and get rid of what needs to be get rid of. And we're going to call in more of what's needed, And so this whole healing container she's basically like the conductor of, That's the way I envisioned it in my little imagination, Like she's conducting
hmm
this orchestra, but you got to be so strong in order to be able to do that. So no, you don't just like roll out wet and then like, oh, look at me, I'm gonna do big things. Ha! You better hope not. You better hope not. So those were very strenuous initiations that she went through. Likewise, in this journey, you may go through some hard things in life, y'all. You may go through the fire, but that fire can be refinement too. Just understand you wouldn't have been brought this far for them to leave you. Keep going through the fire because if you stop, you're going to get burned. Keep moving, keep moving, press on, press
mm,
on. It's building a strength that I know, and I know because I've been through several five-alarm fires in my lifetime. I've been through some real smokeouts, okay? It
mm,
hasn't always been grace. And I'm gonna tell you something, the fortitude that comes from surviving and then extracting the lessons. And remember my definition of wisdom? It's the right application of those lessons. You just got to level up that money can't buy. There ain't no course you can take. No university offers it to get that kind of wisdom. And who is it connected to? I know whose mine was connected to. Creator and my ancestors, my assignment, my overall assignment. I know that. I know that now, but I sure didn't like it at the time. I'll tell you that. Mm-mm. Didn't like it at the time. So it can look like a few different things, but that's how life is. Nobody said life was going to be easy. Who said that? What's his name?
Oh, we don't know who the, we
We
don't know
don't
who,
know.
we don't know.
Who the fool said that? Tell me who it is because I'll call him a liar. No, life ain't going to be easy. So if we can accept that as, first world people, with a lot of comforts that our ancestors were not afforded, if we can accept that even as creatures of comfort, life is still not promised to be easy. Let's just be realistic in our expectations here, right? The rain falls on everybody, the just and the unjust, and let's understand it's going to take some strength and some cultivation of strength to get through. But you got people backing you up and they really want to help right now. You know, they really want you to come through this right now.
Hmm. Very beautifully put, Miss Janetta. Thank you so much for your wisdom. Thank you so much for, gosh, I feel like this conversation is so timely in these times where a lot is going on. And I do think more than ever, I love what you said. And I'm also talking about this in my book. So I do think that there's some synchronicity around just these times are probably one of there's a lot of, like you said, big energies, global political, all the thing energies. But at the same time, never before has there been such big spiritual energy here too. Like, and our ability to tap into that and to meet those energies with that light and with our purpose, I think is so it just gives me it goes beyond hope and gives me belief. And I'm really grateful for this conversation here today. I feel like, I mean, I was gonna ask you if you had any prayer or reflection that you like to leave the community with, but I feel like you left us with so much. But I will just, yeah, just in closing, if there is any last little things that you'd like to say or share, please feel free to bless us with some of that last little wisdom before we go.
Yeah, there's one thing I'd like to leave y'all with, and that is at the core of our ancestors' desire is not just for us to succeed and live in abundance and live in comfort and have wealth and good looking man and all the things that maybe is more us, but lots of money. We can pray and beseech them for these things, but at the core, the real heart of it, what they wish to lead us into is right relations. It's right relations
Hmm.
with ourselves, with each other, with the world around us, as far as it depends on us to be able to be at peace with all things. Now, see, a lot of people, they ain't able to do that. They can't. But that is what they really want us not to learn, to return to. It's a return. right relations.
Ashe, 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 ashe. Well, thank you. I just want to just also, I guess my closing word, just giving so much gratitude, just great spirit to ancestors for being with us on this call and helping to just create a beautiful space for learning and transformation through wisdom sharing. You know, this is like one of the most powerful forms of healing, and it is sitting around and talking story and connecting and relaying information and wisdom. And I just want to thank everyone here for joining this conversation and for the prayers that something today landed and is in support of your journey. We all, as I mentioned, the dress rehearsal's over. And, you know, the wisdom that Miss Junetta shared on this call, may it just be something that you sit with and that supports this journey that you're on. Thank you for coming to Black Condor Talks, connecting with Black Condor Tribe. We, as again mentioned, that we are a healing and ceremonial organization that creates intentional spaces for Black and BIPOC individuals to engage with sacred plant medicine, ancestral practices, and community-based healing. And until next time, thank you for joining us. Take care.